From 1977 to 2003, OmniPark thrilled, energized, and educated guests of all ages. Sprawling across 120 acres of Texas prairie, this one of a kind.
And of course, that's what OmniPark wants you to believe. Let's hear from some fresh perspectives. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Brad Kelly.
Hi, my name is Brent Winter.
Oh, hi, I'm John Palisano.
Greetings, my name is John Wiswell.
Well, my name is Maxwell Gold.
Hi, my name is Pacey Wise.
Hi, my name is Alicia Hilton.
Hello, my name is Angela Eureka Smith.
My name is Ben Thomas.
What is your involvement with the park?
I got involved with the park because I documented the story of the first head of security of the park and how he came to know the secrets of the unconstructed realm of dreams. So there's a lot of rumors about the place, and this is one of them.
So my involvement with OmniPark, I'm one of the few people I personally know that actually went to the park as an adult. I co-authored the story in this volume with Jesse Bullington. He and I became friends through mutual friends of ours who were writers, and we found out that we had a lot in common. We have in common that we're both writers. We have in common that we both used to live in Boulder, Colorado at prior points in our lives. And then we also discovered that we've both been to OmniPark. He went as a kid and I went as an adult. But then I had friends who had been to OmniPark, who had heard about OmniPark in Boulder, and they said that this park is different because it actually promulgates knowledge that is of benefit to humanity. And there's something strange about this particular park. There's something weird about it, something almost otherworldly about it. And I didn't really believe in anything otherworldly or supernatural or anything like that, but I was big into, I don't know, it kind of tugged on that part of me. I'm an Xer, and so I grew up watching the show In Search Of, hosted by Leonard Nimoy in the 70s, which is all about, Bigfoot and Stonehenge and all that kind of thing. And so that part of my interest was piqued. And then they said, look, man, we will pay all the gas money if you do all the driving. And so I said, well, sure, why the hell not? So we went to OmniPark. And I did have a strange experience there. This older man who was probably in his 70s approached me and said that he was my future self. On the one hand, rationally, I know that pretty much, and I was in my 20s at the time, so pretty much any guy 50 years older than me who's Caucasian, who's at roughly my height, could approach me and say he's my future self. And well, in theory, he might be. But then he went on to tell me things both about my past and my future that just really made the hair stand up all over my body. And I don't really want to get into what he said, but I'll just say that it made me hope that he wasn't really my future self, because if what he said comes true, that would not be a good thing.
I became involved in the park through its history. It was a little bit before my time, but I was kind of clued into the history of OmniPark through many other people who said, hey, this is something you should investigate. You do this Dispatches newsletter, and it's something that you might be interested in, especially with your fascination with how theme parks come to be.
So what is my relationship with the park? It's a funny one. So I never went to OmniPark. I'd heard of it. But in the early 2000s, I was big on IRC, and there was a group of us that were just really interested in biology and evolutionary biology and the emergence of evolutionary psychology. We're just talking about different paleontological angles to things. And at some point, someone entered our little group of nerds, and I'm claiming to be Erasmus Hamer, who is a person I'd never heard of, but who said that there were things that we all needed to see, and he was very argumentative and strange, and I thought he was a troll. But some people engaged with him seriously, and I kind of hung around to hear what he had to say. He never logged on again, but those of us who talked to him wound up getting packages literally 2 days later. Like, he had to have mailed us immediately. And the thing that freaked me out when I realized that it was probably from the guy on IRC is that I never gave him my address, and like nobody put their address on IRC. It was this like heavy reinforced box that had some kind of internal refrigeration unit, like way more advanced than a cooler I'd ever seen or used. And I didn't get a chance to crack mine open until someone showed up at my door. It was two men in classic like Men in Black gear, like nice black suits, black sunglasses. I thought it was a gang, but these guys forced their way into my house and said that that was proprietary company property and that they would jail me if I didn't hand it over. And I was just a scared kid, and I was just like, whatever. And that really shook me up, and I had no idea what this was about until I logged onto IRC and found that a couple of my friends had also gotten packages and had also gotten visits the same day from these people who apparently were in like unmarked vans or whatever. I'm thinking this is like Pinkerton stuff. Erasmus Hamer, it turns out, was one of the architects that contributed to making, I think it's the Realm of Man exhibit. And I guess he was some really eccentric theme park builder. Like he would build rides using fossils, like fossilized skeletons of dinosaurs and whales. And he didn't tend to put them in theme parks, though. I guess this was the only theme park work he'd ever done. He tended to work for like exceptionally rich people. There has been no word of where that guy has been, as far as I can tell, for a very long time. And so I don't know if I talked to an Erasmus Hamer. I don't know if that was just somebody like using his name to try to contact people. But that's where I started being interested in OmniPark.
I guess my involvement with the park is I'm looking at Dalton Teague and what he did or may not have done with OmniPark.
As for my relationship with OmniPark, I don't have an official relationship with them, but I have to say I am just generally an enthusiast for theme parks and amusement parks in general. I absolutely got fascinated based on the YouTube series Defunctland by Kevin Perjurer, where he looks into rides that don't exist anymore, parks that don't exist anymore, and I've just sort of been following the story of OmniPark from there. I'm just fascinated with the whole history of it. It just, feels like there's got to be something else going on there. So it's kind of hard not to fall down a rabbit hole when looking into OmniPark and everything that's gone on there. It's one of the more interesting, mysterious theme parks out there, I think.
I am not only an editor of Back to OmniPark, but I also have a personal connection to Dalton Teague. My great uncle, Elsker Hilton, was a friend of Dr. Teague's, and he was also a technosopher. He was one of the scientists who worked with Dr. Teague. And as far as my involvement with the park, I obviously am not old enough to have been around when the park started. I did meet Dr. Teague when I was a little girl once at my great uncle Elsker's house. And like I said, he worked with Dalton. He was a world traveler, my Uncle Elster, and lived overseas in Japan for more than 20 years. He also did business in China, India, the Philippines, South America. He even traveled to New Guinea. I have some pictures, some visual aids to show. So this right here is my great uncle Elster. And you can see him here with elephants on his travels. This is one of his work colleagues in New Guinea with human heads from the Headhunters. And this is when he was traveling to Shanghai aboard ship. And here he is, and there's his wife again with the monkey. So he lived overseas and was doing work as an engineer and also doing a lot of scientific study, bringing samples back, and that is how I'm connected to OmniPark.
I am a longtime obsessive OmniParkeologist, which means that I've been lurking in chat rooms and forum threads, excavating the conspiracy theories around OmniPark for most of my life. For those who don't know, there is a huge web of conspiracy lore around OmniPark, which began really around the time that the park was being built back in the 70s and continues to this day, although the peak era for that conspiracy discussion was in the early 2000s on chat rooms and unmoderated forums. I got sucked deep into that rabbit hole in around 2003, 2004, and have been obsessively collecting conspiratorial material about OmniPark and supposed things that supposedly happened at the park and around it and because of it for nearly 20 years now. And that was one of probably my main inspiration for creating this anthology. My involvement with OmniPark started when I went there for the first time with my family when I was 6 years old. So this would have been 1989. And I actually still have, believe it or not, the souvenir mug that I got on that particular trip. And we went back every few years. We went back in 1990 when I got this guide map, which incredibly enough, I still have. It still has a map of the park from 1990 with the 7 realms arranged in the trademark mandala design around the entryway pavilion at the center. And my family and I only went to OmniPark 3 times. The first time was 1989, second time was 1990, third time was 1991. I found myself affected by those trips to OmniPark in ways that I didn't experience at any amusement park or any other theme park. Like, we also went to Disneyland, and I experienced nothing like any of that when I was at OmniPark. OmniPark was constructed and laid out in a way that produced something akin to a religious experience. When you walked into the entryway pavilion, there was this ambient chorale music playing, and people would just sit in silence looking up at the huge banners for each of the 7 realms around the room. The giant bacteria on the banner for the realm of the cell, and the primordial dragonflies and millipedes on the banner for the realm of life, which was set in the Carboniferous period before there were even dinosaurs, and the octopus and the strange undersea organisms in the realm of the deep, the planets for the realm of the stars. Each one of these realms invited you into a different universe almost, or a different take on this universe. Each one of them was based on a different field of science. For example, astronomy, marine biology, evolutionary biology, but each one of them took that field and made it strange, confronted you with it in a way that was almost terrifying. Certainly impacted me very deeply as a kid, and part of that was due to the intensity of the rides. There were no roller coasters or Ferris wheels or anything like that at OmniPark. All the rides were high-tech descendants of the dark rides at carnivals, like the haunted house rides where you'd get in a cart and it would go on the track. But the ones at OmniPark were so immersive, especially for being back in the 80s and early 90s. There was one particular moment I remember on a ride called The Story of Man, which was in the realm of man, which is about pre-human ancestry. And there's a moment on that ride where the vehicle goes into a cave, and all the lights in the cave, all the firelight turns off. It's totally pitch black. And there's this troop of Homo erectus who are supposedly pawing you in the dark. And there was actually some mechanism on the ride vehicle where you could feel their fingers gripping you, and the breath panting. And there was even a smell, if I'm remembering correctly. I might have imagined that. That experience for me as a 6-year-old was flat out terrifying. I can't believe I ever wanted to go back and ride that ride again. But see, that's the strange thing about OmniPark, is you'd go, one of many strange things about OmniPark is you'd ride a ride like that, or at least I would, and it was terrifying, but it was terrifying in a way that compelled you to want to ride it again and understand what that experience was about. It was just right on the right balance of scary, but not so scary that you didn't want to come back. And I did want to come back year after year.
Rumors abound. Do you think Dalton Teague was simply an eccentric park owner? Or was the park just a means to other ends?
As for whether Dalton Teague was just an eccentric park owner or whether the park was a means to another end, I mean, I can't say for sure, and I don't think anyone can, which I think is what makes it so interesting. I mean, it certainly looks suspicious, I'll say that. It's hard to believe that, it's just eccentricity. It seems like there has to be something going on there, even if it wasn't, Dalton himself behind all of it. Maybe other people used his park as a means to an end, and he was just completely, oblivious to the whole thing. But it does seem a little suspicious to me just to have that many rumors, that many stories, that many urban legends growing up around one park, and for it to all be complete coincidence. I think there's got to be more going on there.
When it comes to Dalton Teague, it seems like almost everyone you talk to who really knew him had a little bit of a different story. He's certainly an eccentric guy, but also, from what I've seen, incredibly well-intentioned. And I think the park, though, it was built for people, and he cared about that aspect. He cared about the educational aspect, the inspirational aspect. In some ways, it seemed like this was cover, and maybe financing, so he could conduct, let's call it, I guess, scientific research.
So was Dalton Teague just an eccentric park owner? Obviously not. Dr. Teague was also a scientist, and he was a world traveler, just like my great uncle, and was exploring the world and other dimensions that connect our world to other worlds. So he's much more than just a wealthy man who happened to own a very unusual theme park.
Is Dalton Teague just a kind of like an eccentric park owner, or was there something else going on with Dalton Teague? I'm of the opinion he's a little of both. I'm pretty sure that he loved theme parks and he loved the overall concept, but I think his world was married together between loving theme park rides and attractions and also something a little bit other and supernatural, perhaps.
I think Dalton Teague is the man who wanted more than he could get. Dalton Teague always carried around this poem with him from Raina Rilke, according to many people that speculated about him. I don't know that we will ever know the true ends or the true means of OmniPark.
Nobody gets that rich without being at least a little deranged. That is my personal opinion. But also, you look at what happened at that park, and I just don't see how the man at the center of it couldn't have been up to something strange. Because he wasn't just entertaining people. It wasn't just making entertainment products. He was always talking about how he was interested in evangelism and cutting-edge experiments. And I think we'll probably get into it later, but things that happened to people at that park, that's not normal problems at a theme park or an entertainment venue. I think Dalton Teague was probably doing something strange, and it wound up getting him in the end.
Theories about this abound. Here's what we know for sure. We know that Dalton Teague was a billionaire who retired from a company called Omni Oil and then spent the next several years traveling around the world with his wife, Evelyn, in particular going to very remote locations. Like he went to Antarctica, they went to some locations deep in the Amazon rainforest, they went to some locations deep in the deserts of Arabia where there were some ancient ruins. Then they came back and started building this park. And the location where they built the park was allegedly a location where lines of energy intersected, and there had allegedly been some kind of Native American ceremonial or sacrificial ground there. I've never been able to find any proof of that. So was the park a means to another end? If so, I don't really know what that other end would be. The only thing it achieved for me personally, as far as I know, was to awaken a deeper sense of awe about the natural world and the history of life on this planet and our place in the cosmos. If that was Dalton Teague's objective, then he certainly achieved it. There's a lot of speculation that he built it for some entirely different nefarious purpose, and that he had some agenda to research things like mind control and extraterrestrial communication for the US government. He certainly had ties to the US government. I've seen photos of him with JFK and Bobby Kennedy and the Bush family, and of course those could have been doctored, who knows. But you can see kind of how there would be these connections between OmniPark and other real government research projects, like, for example, MK Ultra, which was a CIA experiment that dabbled in mind control through psychoactive drugs, and things like Area 51. These all had themes in common with OmniPark, and since Dalton Teague was had personal connections, evidently, with people high up in the US government, there were people who would draw those lines. Many of those people were probably not super mentally stable people who would post walls of text on forum threads and in chat rooms back in the early 2000s. But I read a lot of that stuff. And while I'm not convinced that it's factually true, it's certainly intriguing speculation. I mean, you take the formula of a billionaire who's extraordinarily reclusive, who knows people in the US government, builds a theme park and never provides a clear explanation for why. And you can see how that would add up to a recipe for conspiratorial speculation.
I think Dalton Teague was an eccentric park owner, but I think he was more than that. I think Dalton Teague was a complicated man. I think on the one hand, he actually did care about the betterment of humanity. And I think the role that the park played in promulgating all this scientific knowledge was that he genuinely wanted to educate people and to bring scientific knowledge to the masses and make learning cool, you know? But I think it's also clear that he had other ends that he was working to achieve. I don't think we'll ever know what all those ends were, but I do believe that those ends were not as humanitarian as the public face that the park showed to the world.
I don't really know much about Dalton Teague, nothing real anyways. Everything I know is speculation and third-hand accounts, and a lot of them contradict. Nobody quite seems to know anything about Dalton Teague, which to me, as a newspaper reporter, strikes me as there's a much bigger story there, and I'm still digging. Was he an eccentric park owner? Definitely. Was the park also means to another, perhaps more nefarious end? I think there's a high likelihood of that.
Why do you think he chose the remote location of Odessa, Texas, to build the theme park?
I think there's a lot of possible reasons. The generally accepted one is that Texas is one of the biggest state economies in the United States that doesn't have much regulation. So if you wanted to build a theme park, you could get away with just about anything, especially the part of Texas they wound up basically sectioning off for their park. Like, as far as I understand, they didn't just have a power grid. They had multiple isolated power grids just for their park. And that stuff had no federal regulation. You know, people get weirded out that Disneyland has a lot of influence over the police department in its jurisdiction. As I understand, like, Odessa, Texas basically let OmniPark become the local government. So they could get away with anything and they could cover up anything. And when you see the number of strange injuries and seemingly the instigation of mental illness in so many people, there's so much harm there that they were able to cover up because they had complete control out in the middle of nowhere. Then the other thing, and the thing that like really caught me, is there's a lot of, let's say, gray market for fossils that comes in through Texas's water borders and also across the border with Mexico. And they were right there in the pipeline to get basically anything they wanted in the whole biological record onto their premises extremely quickly and extremely easily. If you look at a bunch of the roads that they had built heading south, like these things almost are channels for resources. So you have no idea what they were able to get away with. And that's the whole point of being out there in the middle of nowhere, is that you could never know because there would never be oversight.
So why did he choose Odessa, Texas? Well, Odessa is a very special place. Not only was it a remote location where you could get a lot of real estate and build OmniPark, but it also happened to be part of a liminal space. So liminal spaces are areas of our world where essentially you have a thin atmosphere, a thin membrane between our world and other worlds. And so underneath Odessa, overhead, various avenues to travel from what we know of as our Earth into other planes, other areas. And that's what's so special about Odessa. And that is what some of our stories expose, is the other worlds that connected OmniPark and our version of Earth to other Earths and even space.
One reason for this, allegedly, is that it was an intersection of energy lines, invisible energy lines that crisscross the Earth. and that at this intersection there was, in times long past, some sort of ceremonial or sacrificial site where Native Americans would gather. The reason Dalton Teague himself gave for choosing that location was that he was a native Texan and had lived all his life in and around Odessa, and that when it came time to choose a location for his theme park, he naturally gravitated toward the place where he grew up. He said California also had its own theme parks, Florida had Disney World, and he felt that Texas should have a world-famous theme park. Why did Dalton Teague feel compelled to build a theme park at all? That's an entirely different question, and one that I don't really have an answer to.
The story that Jesse and I wrote for our part of the anthology deals with the question of the location, because we found some primary source materials that we incorporated into our story. Our story is actually more of a curation than an actual work of fiction. And one of the sections of the story is a letter from an oil prospecting firm that Dalton Teague's father, Wilton Teague, hired to do electrical resistivity testing of the rock in an area outside Odessa. And one thing that letter mentions is that there's a meteor impact crater about 9.5 miles outside Odessa, which is true. I mean, I've looked it up and seen it myself online. The meteor hit about 60,000 years ago, and you can still see the impact crater today. It's a shallow bowl about 200 meters across. And Wilton Teague became obsessed with this meteor impact and thought that maybe that would have affected the availability of oil in the area. And the oil prospector determined that that was not the case, that there's no oil around, no reason to believe that there will be any found, and the meteor had nothing to do with it. But for some reason, Wilton Teague held on to that land, and then later Dalton Teague, when he inherited it, built OmniPark on that land. So I think that meteor that struck the Earth 60,000 years ago had something to do with the location, but I still don't know exactly why.
I would say that Dalton chose to start OmniPark in a remote location because that's usually the best place, because it allows you to expand a park. Usually there's less government oversight. You can do things kind of without, investigators coming and checking on you all the time. And also those sorts of places have a lot of like tax breaks, and they help people who are trying to be entrepreneurs a little bit more than some of the big cities will.
As for why building it in such a remote location in Odessa, Texas, well, I think that's part of what feeds into, all those rumors and the idea that there has to be something going on. I mean, why build it somewhere so remote if, you weren't trying to hide something? The idea of most theme parks is to make it somewhere accessible that lots of people can get to, so you get tourists in the door. Again, just seems a little suspicious to me.
I think perhaps he chose such a remote location for OmniPark was because maybe he thought that there was a loneliness, in such a, there was a line in his favorite poem that says, "Oh, the curves of my longing through the cosmos, and in every streak, my being's flung outness." So I wonder if maybe OmniPark was this flung outness that he thought OmniPark would represent, just out in the middle of nowhere.
Why do I think Dalton chose the remote location of Odessa, Texas to build a theme park? It's a really good question, because why would somebody? The whole point of a theme park is that you attract visitors. Who is going to go to Odessa, Texas to visit? Things that are dark thrive the best in the dark. And so I'm not sure that Odessa, Texas was an accidental location pick, or it was specifically picked because it was so remote. Think about it. It took ambulances and other emergency workers a long time to get there because of the distance and the isolation.
Why did he choose this remote location of Odessa, Texas? A lot of people wonder that. It's in the middle of nowhere. For a theme park to be around nothing else, Dalton Teague maybe wasn't the first person to do that, but certainly there's a lot of other places he could put it. Well, the truth is, and in my opinion, there are secrets very close to the surface there in Odessa. The native tribes, they knew this, and there were oral traditions now all but lost to history that spoke of communing with spirits there, though, translation has obviously obscured what they meant by communing or meant by spirits. And somewhere along the line, Dalton Teague had come into contact with this information. He knew that was the spot to do what he needed to do.
What would you say to people who claim there were supernatural and otherworldly influences at the park?
I think it's clear that there were supernatural and otherworldly experiences at the park. And I say this as a person who takes a skeptical view of such things in general. But when you look at all the rumors and all the unexplained occurrences and all the coincidences and all the negative things that happened, all the potentially illegal things that happened, when you string it all together, either the most bizarre series of circumstances in the history of coincidences, in the history of coincidences, occurred over a 26-year period, or something supernatural was going on. I mean, I just use Occam's razor, and I think the supernatural is actually the simplest explanation for everything that went on at OmniPark.
It's hard to say exactly what to say about the claims that there are supernatural and otherworldly influences at the park. I personally am an atheist. I wouldn't say I'm a hardcore atheist. Maybe agnostic would be a better term. Supernatural is a tough term for me for that reason. People who claim things like that the park was haunted, for example, that's very tough for me to get my brain around because I don't believe in ghosts. Then again, there are other claims that I would class as not supernatural, but paranormal. For example, that there was a UFO stored there at some time, that the park at the Realm of the Stars, that there were people who were actually working on extraterrestrial communication or actually managed to achieve communication with an extraterrestrial entity at some point. That was a popular theory for a long time. Again, evidence is not super convincing, but that's easier to believe in than something like that the park is haunted or that there were monsters that lived there, because extraterrestrials are scientifically plausible, right? It's not outside the realm of possibility that if somebody was going to succeed in contacting them, it could be the technosophers who designed OmniPark. They certainly had the technology and the funding to attempt a project like that. Other claims that I've heard are that there were experiments in the alteration of human consciousness taking place at OmniPark. And if you think about it, what better place than a theme park to conduct experiments using vibration, infrasound, frequencies of sound and light to provoke altered states of consciousness in a large number of people, and have a control group versus a non-control group and contrast those two sets of data. It's hard to imagine a better location than a theme park to collect those data sets and compose the groups of thousands of people, and then have a huge amount of data that you could use for who knows what research purpose. Was there some, I mean, the fact is that the fact is that thousands of people went to OmniPark before it opened, were invited there as test audiences, were forced to sign NDAs, and never revealed what they experienced in that period in the late 70s.
After everything that I've looked into, there were absolutely some supernatural, strange events happening there that weren't normally accounted for sure.
Obviously, I do believe that there were otherworldly influences. I know this from stories from my great uncle Elsner, and I also know this from other evidence that I have seen personally myself. I know that underneath OmniPark, there were avenues, there were portals to go to other worlds, and there were also ways to connect to space.
Again, who can say for sure, but I am absolutely on the side of people who believe that there is something going on there. It just seems, there's too many stories about people disappearing, about people seeing odd things at the park, something out of the corner of your eye, something that's not quite right in the ride experiences or in the theme buildings. I definitely believe if not a haunted park, then, there's something there that is not fully human and fully natural or natural as we understand it.
A lot of people, want there to be supernatural influences at the park. We all want to believe in Bigfoot. We all want to believe in UFOs. And of course, an equally large number of people say that's all nonsense and that it's all just myth making and tall tales and ghost stories. If such thing is possible, it's certainly happening at OmniPark, or it was. Perhaps no one but Dalton, and maybe not even him, knows the extent of it or has seen much else beyond sort of the faintest traces. But time is different there. So many people say this. And somehow scale's different in space. You're in some ways, it feels like you're not on Earth anymore, depending on what corner of the park you are in. And yeah, I think there's fingerprints of something supernatural all over that ground.
You know, I wonder about those who make claims of the supernatural and the quote-unquote otherworldliness of the park. I don't know that we'll ever truly know. You know, I think it all ties back to his obsession, supposedly, with this poem that he always carried around with him. He always had it with him. It was always in his offices. It was everywhere with him. And you know, I think it kind of represents I don't know, like a blurred omnipotence, I suppose, if you will. And I guess to those people who claim that supernatural otherworldliness, you know, maybe there was, but maybe we'll never know.
So what do I think about supernatural stuff that happened at the park? I mean, I never went there, right? So I can't say that like I saw a ghost at OmniPark. However, so many people have reported absolutely uncanny things happening there that I am sure they were doing something with at least like a small section of the people who came to visit. Like they were, I don't know if they were doing experiments, if this was psychological warfare testing, if this was experimenting with the advancements that the Teagues claimed they wanted to see done with science, but stuff that was on the cutting edge was definitely happening there. And that would explain why they needed such a huge power grid, a power grid that's way bigger than anything that any other theme park or even really city of that size has ever required. I believe strange things and inexplicable things happened there. Or were they supernatural? I mean, everything's supernatural until you can explain it right. And the Teagues were sort of just fascinated. Same with Erasmus Hamer, with figuring out the explanations for the inexplicable and then evangelizing them. I'd say if they reopened it today, I wouldn't go there. That's what I would say.
The park has a history of disappearances and strange accidents, all of which were explained away. Do you think there were cover-ups in some of these cases?
Well, you know, obviously when you have experimentation and science and national security issues like that, you have a need to know. And not everyone needs to know what goes on. It's the same way when you're dealing with, for instance, the FBI. I used to be an FBI agent. You understand that there are certain things that people have a need to know and they are investigating, and the general public doesn't have to need to know, especially if it's a situation where you have a potential for danger and you do not want people to be getting hurt. So you don't want them wandering into a place, an atmosphere where you could have connections to other worlds and where you have, you know, potential for danger.
You know, there's definitely been documented cases of strange things happening at the park, disappearances, accidents that didn't quite make sense, reviews and articles that were put online that have gone and have been explained away. Were there cover-ups? Was there a kind of deep state thing happening? I would say that there probably was, to a degree, for sure.
Now, there's been also, among the rumors, there's a lot of rumors that there were disappearances, you know, weird, inexplicable accidents. You might have heard about in talking to your friend on a golf course or something, and it never can quite be traced back. I've heard some people claim this was the reason the park was ultimately shut down, that Teague felt the pressure of these disappearances. He kind of felt the heat closing in and started to regret the fact that he was drawing people there. I don't know what was going on exactly, but I do know that some of the other researchers, and I'm talking about Elijah Shattuck here, some of the other researchers, the technosophers, would be willing to go to great lengths to keep their work going. And, you know, they're eccentric. You talk about Teague being eccentric. These guys were another level. People say Teague was strange, you know, try sitting around the campfire with a half a dozen of his most dedicated staff. Teague may have started it, but he didn't have access to every little thing that happened under that roof.
Do I think some of the cases of accidents had official cover-up. Look, we don't need to be conspiracy theorists about this. Look at every major theme park. Universal Studios has accidents that get covered up by NDAs and bribes. Disneyland, Disney World have the same thing. Stuff at the scope that OmniPark was at, there's no question stuff happened that they smoothed over. Given how many people who worked on and in and for the park have completely disappeared, I think they invited these conspiracy theories. I wish that they'd ever given formal answers.
The history of the disappearances at the park. Yeah, I absolutely think that there have been cover-ups. Stories sneak out. They can't control everything, but I do think that, again, even if it wasn't Dalton Teague himself, maybe the people working for him were covering things up either on his behalf or, keeping things from him as well. But I absolutely believe that people disappeared at the park and that the park is actively working to suppress that information.
I do think that there were probably a few cover-ups at OmniPark, just like any large business would do, or any billionaire who's got multiple business interests. They would take steps to cover things up, just like the big oil companies do today. I don't know if there's anything that sinister about it, but I actually don't think that accounts for most of the events being explained away at OmniPark. I think what is operative there is people's desire not to understand. I think that what was really going on at OmniPark would be frightening to most people. And I think that when occasionally the corner of the veil was lifted up to show what was really beneath it, I think most people's minds just turn away. It's like T.S. Eliot said, humankind cannot bear very much reality. And I think that our own desire to not know what was happening was the biggest factor in explaining why so many of the unexplained events at OmniPark remained unexplained.
So OmniPark has a history of disappearances and strange accidents, all of which were explained away in mundane ways. For example, there was a ride called the Wild World of Life that was built in the early 80s and was demolished later that same year after a number of guests got sick on it. And I believe one person died. I could be wrong about that. But the reason that was given in the news was that the ride itself was not safe. It hadn't been adequately tested. And that was the story that OmniPark continued to go with until they closed in 2003. So was there a cover-up? I mean, yes, in the sense that somebody certainly got hurt on that ride, and OmniPark never really disclosed the reason why. Was it simply that the ride's motion made them sick, or that the vehicle malfunctioned in some way and ended up hurting someone? Or was it, as was speculated in the OmniParkeology forum community, that the ride's message and imagery provoked illness or even insanity in the people who rode the ride? There were people who actually asserted that on the forums. As far as disappearances at the park, the only ones that I've heard about are the deaths of workers. Apparently there were something around 12 people who died during the construction of OmniPark. Again, the official story was that these people were killed in routine construction accidents. There's always going to be some amount of injuries on a large-scale construction site like this, where you're working with large machinery. As far as I know, that's all that there is to the story. There is a line of speculation that those deaths were not accidental, that they were either deliberate or were orchestrated in some way or were even planned for some other purpose. There were people in the forums who speculated that this was a blood sacrifice, that the park was supposed to be built on a location where human beings had been ritualistically killed. I find that quite outrageous. I think if anything remotely like that had happened, everyone else involved with the project would have quit. I mean, I can't imagine continuing to work on a job site where that's even a rumor going around. But nonetheless, that's what people have claimed ever since the park was built in the late 70s.
Is there a particular realm or omnicon you find yourself drawn to, and why?
A particular realm that I'm interested in at OmniPark, I think the realm of the stars has always been actually, pretty fascinating to me. The idea of, the cosmos and, maybe that, wasn't just the cosmos as we know it that's represented at the park, but the builders, the actually did manage to tap into something outside of this world. I think those rumors are true.
I find the realm of dream to be the most compelling of all of them. And that's maybe just personal. I've always been interested in dreams. I wrote a novel about the dream world as an important region of human experience. And my own dreams have been a constant source of inspiration and insight and mystery. And so science usually just kind of steps around this stuff. But Teague understood, he understood that you just couldn't throw away a third of the human experience. Something fundamentally important is going on in the dream. And Teague not only wanted to get to the source of it, explorer that he was, but he wanted to help everyone else get there. So, well-intentioned, like I said, but sometimes the path to hell is paved with good intentions.
I have always been drawn to the realm of time at OmniPark, and I think that one of the sections of our story, mine and Jesse's story in the anthology, is an essay written by a boy in the 5th grade. It was one of those what I did on my summer vacation essays. And it's about how he and his dad went to OmniPark on his summer vacation. And it was not long after the boy's mother had died. And he wanted to go to the realm of time because he thought that maybe Dalton Teague could send him back in time to when his mom was still alive. And I don't know about everyone else watching this, but I had a troubled childhood, and the trouble began at a certain definite point. Before that point, I had a pretty good childhood. After that point, everything went to hell. So there have been times when I've wondered if I could travel back in time, if I could go back to that earlier period when things were still good, what it would be like. There's part of me that has always yearned for that. And I think when I discovered that essay that boy had written, that's what piqued my interest to even work on this project with Jesse. And I thought maybe there's something we can really work with here, because it tugged at my heartstrings.
And it should be unsurprising to you that like the realm of man, which is related to the work of Erasmus Hamer, is what like really grabbed my attention, especially when I realized that like a lot of incredibly refrigerated, climate stabilized packaging to ship bones was used to create so-called authentic exhibits within the realm of man. So I find that one particularly questionable, because I wonder how many World Heritage sites were affected, let's say, siphoned to some degree to help build that place, and what they were doing with it. Why do you need authentic chimpanzee bones from 25 million years ago? I don't understand. But I find it very troubling and very curious because of the hallucinations that people seem to have had when they went in. I wish we could find out more about what those people really experienced in the realm of man, but we can't because of the NDAs that for some reason hold legally binding after OmniPark is long gone.
My favorite personally was always the realm of the deep. I've been obsessed with marine biology ever since I was a kid. I used to look through these books of aquarium fish that we had at our house and memorize the names of all the fish. And so going to the realm of the deep, I loved how scientifically accurate it was. I loved that you could look at every single fish in that realm and identify what species it was. That was how fine-grained the scientific detail was. I could point to that one and say, oh, that's a clownfish, or that one, that's an 8-banded wrasse. And then in addition, there were also a lot of fictional creatures. For example, in the main ride, which was a submarine voyage, there was some sort of sentient crustacean that attacked it was a sentient swarm of crustaceans, deep sea isopods, who attacked the submarine at the climax of the ride. And little kid me loved that too, because I was obsessed with imagining what kinds of strange creatures might exist deep in the sea that we didn't know about or that was left to be discovered. I remember reading that we've explored less of the deep ocean than of the surface of the moon. And as far as I know, that's still true. So the realm of the deep just deeply, no pun intended, gripped me as a kid.
I think my favorite realm of OmniPark is the realm of the deep, because I think it represents Dalton Teague's how far down his ambition goes. You know, his ambition is terrifying, and I think that's what the realm of the deep represents to me.
In investigating OmniPark, one of the realms that really fascinated me was the realm of the stars. The realm of the stars just seemed to have something different going on, and I think that one in particular was one that was really crucial to a lot of people thinking there were supernatural and other elements happening in OmniPark.
I found myself particularly drawn to the realm of the stars, and that is the connection, obviously, to other galaxies. In the very first OmniPark book, Tales from OmniPark, one of my stories was published in that book, Stellar Nucleosynthesis and the Infinite Power of Love. And that is all about one theory behind the origin of OmniPark and how Dr. Teague actually knew extraterrestrials.
Why do you think the planned 8th realm of Dream was never built?
There was an 8th realm planned, the realm of Dream, and it was never built. It was started. Teague funneled a bunch of money into it. The story I've brought to OmniPark is for OmniPark that I've managed to get my hands on is one explanation. Maybe it's an exaggeration. Maybe it's a myth. I don't think so. Think about those disappearances that we talked about.
Yeah, I have very interesting theories about the realm of Dream. I'm not sure how accurate these theories are, but I know that Teague was very interested in alternative, cutting-edge theoretical physics. And I have done my own research along those lines, and I've discovered a physicist named David Bohm, B-O-H-M, who has a theory to explain all of reality. According to Bohm, there is all of external reality that we can witness. He calls that the explicate realm, and he theorizes that the explicate is constantly arising from a substrate called the implicate realm, and that as the explicate arises from the implicate, it goes back down into the implicate, and the interplay between implicate and explicate is that generates this four-dimensional space-time array that we experience as reality. Furthermore, the implicate is a hologram, so that every point in it is coextensive or contiguous with every other point in it. So in theory, if you could access the implicate realm, you could access all of space-time, any point in the past, any point in the future, and any point in the universe. You could get there. And furthermore, David Bohm theorizes that the phenomenon in the explicate world that most closely mirrors the implicate is consciousness. So if you could manipulate consciousness correctly, you could access the implicate realm. And I believe that this happens in dreams sometimes, specifically phenomena like precognitive dreams or clairvoyant dreams. I believe that when people have experiences like precognition and clairvoyance in dreams, which many of us have had, I think that's a time when your consciousness has accessed the implicate realm. And so I think his realm of dream was his own attempt to get there, because if you're a humanitarian, then imagine the good you could do. Or if you were a power-hungry, greedy billionaire, imagine the advantage and the gain you could reap for yourself. Whether you attribute saintly or devilish motives to him, obviously, I think he was interested in getting to the implicate realm, but I just don't think he ever got there. I think it wound up being a challenge he could never satisfactorily solve.
I think that the planned 8th realm of the dream was never built because it was opening something that was a lot bigger than anybody, even Dalton Teague, were expecting. I think there was a lot happening there that originally they thought that they could handle, and once they started opening that door, they realized it wasn't one they could open, and it could have much, much larger consequences than they had originally thought.
I've talked to people who know a lot more about the other realms than I do. And we all feel like the realm of dream was supposed to be some work in progress that was going to be the synthesis of what all the other realms were aiming toward. And they hadn't learned enough, which I feel like just points towards unethical behavior to their patrons, that they were doing things to the patrons in order to advance some cause. But it's still a mystery to me. Like, what was the realm of dream even really supposed to be?
But I always wonder if the realm of the dream was never built because it would have been too much for him. I always wonder if the realm of the dream was something that would have maybe killed him. Maybe it was something that he could never achieve, and maybe he just thought it was maybe his ambition was too great. The middle to last stanza in the poem says, hastening through the once existent future, knowing themselves in the season or airily as a persistent timed influence, almost star-like in the over-wakeful apparatus for a brief moment, trembling. So I think the realm of a dream was something that he maybe could never get. So I think that I always wonder about that.
Going back to all those rumors and the stories swirling around, I think it's very possible that as they were building it, they tapped into something that they didn't mean to and realized that it was going to be too dangerous and they had to shut it down. They were already, stories about disappearances, stories about supernatural occurrences happening, and I don't think they could keep suppressing it if they had let it go on. I mean, it was just getting to be too much. So they had to shut it down. That's my theory.
So why do I think the eighth realm, the realm of dream, was never built? Well, Dr. Teague was a scientist and he was a logical man. And he also, was a responsible individual where he did not want to have situations that were dangerous for his staff, for his scientists, and for the general public, the people who would visit OmniPark, whether they were VIPs or, ordinary folks who just wanted to have a nice time, in an unusual theme park. And so there were some realms that were, they were envisioned a certain way and they were built that way. Some realms were envisioned a certain way and they were built other ways that were safer. And then some realms were just deemed essentially too dangerous. And so he didn't go forward with them. And the realm of dream was one of those.
Why do I think the eighth realm of dream was never built? Who says it wasn't built? Who says it doesn't exist somehow? And I mean, the whole park is messed up. Maybe the realm of dream does exist, but it's a super VIP area that none of us have ever had access to. None of us that'll talk about it. And that place is so weird. How do we know that we didn't go to the realm of dream? What if the whole thing is just one big realm of dream? I'm honestly glad it's closed. Maybe.
Why do I think the planned eighth realm, the realm of dreams, was never built? That is a question that has intrigued me ever since I first heard about the realm of dream in a chat thread back in the early 2000s. Somebody in that thread actually posted what they alleged were schematics and plans for the realm as it was going to be built, and they included some technologies, or at least proposals for technologies, that almost seem unbelievable. For example, there was supposed to be a machine that when you walked through it as part of an entryway, that it created a lucid dream state in guests' consciousness. I have a hard time believing that anything like that could have actually been built. I'm also not sure why OmniPark would have wanted to build something like that. It seems a little extreme even for them, but that just the idea that they would have even attempted or thought of, or that one of the technosophers would have even pitched an idea like that is incredibly intriguing to me. So the first part of my answer to that question is that I am intrigued by the question of why the realm of dreams was conceived in the first place. Why it doesn't seem to necessarily fit into the seven realms that were actually built. All of the other seven realms were related to fields of science. The realm of life was biology, realm of the deep, marine biology, the realm of the particle, quantum or atomic physics, the realm of the stars, space and planetary science. And the realm of dream doesn't really seem to fit into that scheme. Dream research is a scientific field, but it's much more a soft science than the hard science of the other realms. And as far as why it was never built, I would say the reason the realm of dreams was never built was that Dalton or someone in OmniPark management finally realized that it couldn't be fit into that hard scientific scheme of the other seven realms. It was just too out there. Another possibility is that the realm of dreams was never built because the technologies that were proposed, to produce a lucid dream state and bring guests into these altered states of consciousness, that those technologies were either not feasible to actually build, or that they were feasible, but that they produced effects that OmniPark didn't want to have to deal with. That is a very popular theory about the realm of dream, that OmniPark actually did succeed in building at least some of the rides or the technologies for provoking dream states in guests, but realized that they would get into all kinds of legal trouble if it ever got out that they were actually using these technologies on guests. And then, of course, there's the theory that the whole realm of dream idea was a cover-up for clandestine research that OmniPark was doing for the US government into dream states and altered states of consciousness. It's certainly well known that in the 60s and 70s, the US government was doing research into altered states of consciousness and the subconscious. That's one of the things that Project MK Ultra was focused on, inducing altered states of consciousness as a means to mind control. That's documented historical fact. If OmniPark was going to research something like that, that's certainly the time when it was in vogue to be researching altered states of consciousness. Do I actually believe OmniPark was doing research into controlling people's minds? Probably not, but I can see why it's a plausible conspiracy theory.
In its heyday, OmniPark was hosting upwards of 35,000 guests per day and remained one of the Southwest's most popular tourist destinations for the next 25 years. Why do you think it finally closed?
I have never really known why OmniPark was closed. I've just always assumed that something really bad went wrong and that was covered up, and it was the final cover up. I think Teague realized that his explorations were finally going too far, even for him. Maybe something happened that personally threatened him. Maybe someone he loved was personally threatened. Maybe the authorities were starting to get curious. Maybe some other intelligence or entity of unknown origin was taking an interest in him. I think he brushed too close to danger, and while he was not always that cautious about putting other people in danger, I don't think he was interested in being in danger. So I think he flew almost too high, too close to the sun, and turned back to Earth just before his wings melted off.
I think OmniPark ultimately closed for a variety of reasons. I think that in planning the Eighth Realm, they realized that there was a lot happening on this land than they ever really thought was there. I think that they discovered things that were really frightening to them, and the implications were just too much to bear. And I do not put it past any government agencies to maybe have stepped in and said, hey, we're shutting this down. Once they caught wind of it, with 35,000 people per day showing up, it wasn't exactly flying under the radar. And I think that some of these experiments and some of these things that were happening there were being widely reported and caught the attention of, the Men in Black and the black helicopters and groups like that. And some may say those groups don't exist and they're silly and they're fun science fiction movies, but there's definitely something going on where it did seem that there was some pressure going on, because they were very financially doing good for a long time, and suddenly things started slipping away. So it was very, very curious.
Why did it close then if it was so successful? Well, you have to understand Dalton Teague was the spiritual and actual father of the park. And he was the kind of guy who might dedicate his life to a project that's, put all of his efforts into something. But he was judging himself based on values that were mostly invisible to the people around him. For all I know, he decided he'd accomplished everything he wanted to do, but maybe he just understood that if he was no longer running the ship, then, well, things might really get out of control.
I think at some point, a giant science experiment where your patrons are the sample size is going to become a problem. And maybe this place should have closed sooner. I'm not sure. Their goals sounded really lofty and wonderful, right? But also it seems like these people showed up at random kids' houses to threaten them into handing over their mail. So I think whatever they were doing caught up with them. That's probably the best answer I can give you.
Personally, I think that after Dalton Teague died in 2001, I remember vividly where I was when I learned that he died. I was actually watching the Oscars in 2001, and the announcement came up that he had just passed, and I actually started crying. That was how deep my attachment to OmniPark was as a kid. So what I always assumed was that OmniPark closed because without Dalton to lead it, there was no one at the prow of the ship anymore, or nobody at the wheel, whatever metaphor you want to use. And the project just fell apart without him. Evelyn Teague, his wife, did become park CEO after he died, but her tenure only lasted a couple of years, and I don't really know why. She was even more reclusive, if anything, than he was. She never did any press appearances to explain why the park closed. So for me, those pieces just naturally fell into place. Dalton Teague died. 2 years later, OmniPark closed. I assumed that with no Dalton Teague, there was no OmniPark. Then I started reading forum threads and chat room threads in which people proposed all kinds of other ideas. One person proposed that the research projects that OmniPark was working on for the US government were moved into even more classified locations, and that OmniPark as a black site for this kind of research was no longer needed. That theory made the rounds in the 2003-2004 era, after the park's closing. It was very popular. Another group of people suggested that whatever purpose Dalton Teague had set out to achieve with OmniPark, that he finally succeeded. Whether that purpose was to complete some black sites, black ops research for the government, or to alter humanity's consciousness in some way, or to achieve contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. Whatever it was, people said he succeeded. He completed it. And then the thing about, so people say that Dalton Teague completed whatever project he was working on, whether it was mind control or contact with an extraterrestrial civilization or time travel or whatever that research project was, that he completed it, and then rather than dying, he just disappeared out of public view. Some people say that he is still alive out there somewhere today, which would be pretty extraordinary. He'd be over 100 years old, or nearly 100 years old, but that he just disappeared from public view and the park closed because it was no longer needed. Personally, I don't find those theories as compelling as just that he was elderly, he passed away, and without any central leadership, there was no coordinated effort to keep OmniPark going. And I think maybe on a personal note, I would say that when Dalton Teague died, a little bit of magic went out of the world for me. I think a lot of people, myself included, found it hard to contemplate going back to OmniPark without knowing that he was no longer alive to be involved with the project. So for many people, it may have just been that simple. With no Dalton Teague, there was no reason to go.
Why do I think OmniPark closed? Well, some things do come to an end. Dr. Teague was getting older, and he did not have the same burning desire to be exploring new worlds and testing the limits of science. And so he decided just to wind things down. I do not think that the park was closed because of any kind of catastrophe or cover-up, but more of a sensible time to wind it down because Dr. Teague was getting older and there wasn't really anyone who was suitable to take over and run the theme park in the same way that he was, with a hands-on, serious scientific inquiry and also attention to what ordinary folks needed with their entertainment.
There was nothing to go to in Texas except for OmniPark for quite a while. And why do I think it finally closed? I think maybe Dalton Teague dug a little too deep into some of these things. Too many people were getting involved. There was too much publicity. 35,000 people a day. Secrets get out. I think that's why it closed. And he was aging. I don't think he could control it like he used to, as well as he used to.
As for why I think OmniPark finally closed after being so successful, again, I think it goes down, back to why they never completed the Realm of Dream. I think it was getting too dangerous. I think they couldn't keep covering up the disappearances. I think they couldn't keep hiding, what was really going on there from the public. There's only so many stories that you can claim, it was just a weather balloon. It was, we were filming a movie there, whatever it was. They couldn't keep hiding the evidence of the supernatural. And, too many people were showing up, asking the wrong kinds of questions, and they had to stop.
What do you say to people who claim OmniPark was a danger?
There are a lot of people that feel that OmniPark ultimately became a danger. I agree with them, especially after the things that I have read about. They knew that there was dangerous elements early on. In fact, there was an early ride called Above and Beyond that one of the technosophers, Kate Kelly, was developing early on, and that particular ride also had some very, very serious elements that were opening up that they were a little bit afraid of, that were very dangerous, and they stopped production on that ride and went forward with others. So I do think that there were dangerous elements being messed with very early on in the process, and ultimately it led to the closure of OmniPark. And now we're kind of investigating the history and seeing what was there and looking for clues and cues as to what happened.
I think OmniPark was a danger in much the same way that nuclear power is a danger, which is to say it's a mixed picture. In the short term, nuclear power is a very clean form of energy, very efficient form of energy. And if you look at a time scale in terms of decades or a century or two, nuclear power is probably the preferable form of energy for us to be using, especially if you want to transition away from fossil fuels. But nuclear power has a gigantic downside, which is the waste problem. What do you do with radioactive waste that's going to stay that way for 10,000 years? We haven't solved that problem. And what scares me about nuclear power is we're not waiting to solve that problem before putting it to use. All we're doing is shoving that problem down the line for our descendants to hopefully solve. And so I think that nuclear power has a lot of benefit and a gigantic downside. And I think OmniPark is the same way. It did bring a lot of benefit to humanity during the time it was open, but at what cost?
As for whether OmniPark was dangerous, I think it absolutely was. I don't think it was they ever intended to hurt people. I think maybe things got out of control and, bad things started happening. And then they ended up having to cover it up and it snowballed from there. So I do think, there is a danger in just regular theme parks and amusement parks. And then when you have a theme park that's sort of accidentally or on purpose connecting us to another world, well, the danger is going to be that much greater.
What do I say to people who claim OmniPark was a danger? I mean, I felt threatened when those people showed up at my house. So I could imagine some really dangerous stuff being done to people who were at the park in the total purview of the park with no outside help or oversight. What they were trying to do there sounds great, but science often sounds great when you're not a subject of the human testing.
So of course, there was a potential for accidents, a potential for dangerous happenings at OmniPark, just like there would be at other places like Epcot at Disney. Dr. Teague and his technosophers and the other people who were on staff, they tried to make it as safe as possible for visitors and also the people who worked at OmniPark. But you cannot prevent every, happenstance that is dangerous from happening. Some things cannot be predicted. And so, yes, there were a few incidents, but nothing untoward or horrendous.
What do I say to people who claim that OmniPark was a danger? Yes, go with your gut.
It was certainly dangerous in that it changed my consciousness in profound ways. And I don't mean in the ways people usually claim in forum threads and chat rooms that it's some kind of mind control technology. I mean that the rides and the realms were so well designed, and the experience of being there was so immersive in every sense that you couldn't come out of that experience without your views being changed. His park evoked these sensations not in ways that made you dislike the fact that you were small and just one individual organism in billions of years of time, but made you love the universe all the more for being that expansive. So was OmniPark a danger? It was a danger to the small-minded way of thinking in which I grew up. Whether people died there, evidently so. For what purpose, I really can't say.
I've heard people say that OmniPark was a dangerous place to visit. I think as a guest, the chances were You would go there for a day or two and have the time of your life, and nothing bad would happen to you except a little sunburn, you know. And there are stories about things happening to people, and I can't tell you one way or the other which ones are true, but 35,000 people a day and 34,999.999 of them on average were fine. Now, for a technosopher, there were more dangers, that's for sure. We would be remiss to not reconsider kind of what we mean by dangerous, because, you know, how safe is it to have your preconceptions thrown out the window? How safe is it to have your mind blown?
Down to the micro scale.
My name is Brad Kelly.
Hi, my name is Brent Winter.
Oh, hi, I'm John Palisano.
Greetings, my name is John Wiswell.
Well, my name is Maxwell Gold.
Hi, my name is AC Wise.
Hi, my name's Alicia Hilton.
Hello, my name is Angela Eureka Smith.
My name is Ben Thomas.
I'm a science fiction and fantasy author. A couple years ago, I won the Nebula Award for Best Short Story for Open Half on Haunted Hill, and the Locus Award for Best Novelette for That Story Isn't the Story. My works have been translated into 10 languages, and my debut novel, called Someone You Can Build a Nest In, comes out from Daw Books in 2024.
I'm a writer and editor living in Carborough, North Carolina. I'm author of the novel Blood Family and the novella Sisterhood of the Elf Shot, as well as a bunch of short stories, all of which you can find at dstreetisrael.com.
I'm an author of many books and short stories and nonfiction articles.
I am a multi-award nominated prose poet in weird and cosmic fiction, cosmic horror.
I'm a podcaster, co-host of Art of Darkness podcast, fiction writer, and yeah, I guess that's probably all you need to know about me.
I am the author of the novels Wendy Darling and Hooked, and the recent short story collection, The Ghost Sequences, and I have a handful of other short stories out in the world, and I also do reviews for Apex Magazine, and that is me.
I'm an author and the co-editor of Back to OmniPark. I'm also an arbitrator, an attorney, an actress, and a former FBI special agent, and my website is aliciahilton.com.
I'm a third-generation Shimanchu American, an award-winning poet, author, and publisher with over 20 years of experience, mostly in newspapers. I'm a publisher of Space and Time magazine that's been around since 1966, a 2-time Bram Stoker Awards winner, and the HWA Mentor of the Year for 2020.
I am the lead editor at House Blackwood, a publishing company that specializes in weird fiction and horror. I'm the editor of the anthology Back to OmniPark, which is a collection of fictional stories that take place in an enhanced fictional universe around the park, OmniPark, which we remember from our childhood.